The wheel of time turns, and ages come and go, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. The Wheel of Time turns and podcasts come and go. Welcome to Wattcast, a Wheel of Time book and watch club. We are reading Robert Jordan's epic fantasy series and watching Amazon's Wheel of Time TV show. I'm Caleb Wimble, and with me are Dan Kutinsky.
Hey everyone.
Keeley Frank.
Hello.
And Nick Wicks.
Hey guys.
You can find us at wattcast.net and support the show at patreon.com/wattcast. Your support means a lot. Even $2 at the Two Rivers tier helps. Join us at the $5 Tar Valen tier, and you'll get special bonus episodes in the White Tower, where we talk with guests about other fantasy series like Dune and The Witcher. Email us questions, comments, and corrections via contact@wattcast.net with the subject line questions, and we'll read them here on the show. For those unfamiliar, The Wheel of Time is an epic fantasy series by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. We've read through the first book already. We watched the first season of the TV show, and today we are digging into Book 2, The Great Hunt, chapters 31 to 35. Dan, you want to tell us in brief what happens in the course of these chapters?
So in chapter 31, the whole party meets up at the Great Tree. They discover through Hern's tracking that Fane is hiding out in Barthanus. Is that his name again? I forget how we pronounce his name.
Sounds right. Barthanus.
Barthanus' new mansion. Fortunately, Rand has an invitation, conveniently. Varen questions Rand about what they've been up to while they've been staying in the city. They learn from Varen that the massive statue being dug up outside of the city by the king is a sangreal. In chapter 32, the group attends Barthanus' party, breaking into smaller groups to not draw suspicion. And learning more about the great game, Rand realizes how little he actually knows about it. He has an encounter with Barthanus and also stumbles into Tom, who is performing at the party. Tom is informed about the current status of the horn, but as much as he'd like to get involved, he refuses to get involved and tries to shy away from it and stay clear of Rand and everything going on with him. Mm-hmm. In chapter 33, Hearn shows Rand the Waygate. They find a way to excuse themselves from the party and go out to the courtyard where the Waygate's stationed at. Rand opens it only to immediately encounter Mashishin the Black Wind. Mashishin shouldn't be able to exit the waste, but somehow is able to. Rand channels the one power and blasts. It's kind of not super descriptive, but somehow generates an energy blast at Mashishin, while Loyal manages to close the gate. Barthanus tells Rand that Fane is heading to Toman Head, where he'll be waiting for Rand, just as Rand and his party are leaving the mansion. This draws suspicion from the group after Rand tells them. Some think it's a trap, but Rand's determined to go to Toman Head. In chapter 34, Tom returns to his room only to find that Dina has been murdered and her assassins lie in wait to ambush him. He's quicker than the assassins and is able to best them, killing one and interrogating the other. Tom believes that Barthanus is responsible, but the innkeeper Zira informs him that Barthanus has been murdered and Galdrion is responsible. Tom heads out with vengeance on his mind. Meanwhile, Padden Fane has reached Toman Head. We get some of his perspective there, and he's gathered information on the invading Shanchan. He goes about a plan he has conspired, which involves handing over the chest with the horn and dagger to Torak. He tried
who is the lord of the local Shanchan.
Yeah, the local Shanchan. We've seen Torak is the one that is the same lord that took I'm spacing on his name right now, but the sea
Bail
trader.
Doman. Yep.
Bail Doman, captive or a few chapters earlier. So Padden Fane has this plan devised in mind. So he tries to entice Turok, who is able to open the chest somehow. They haven't explained how Turok has this knowledge, but he's able to open the chest using the horn and he tries to convince Turok to use the horn to conquer the land and take the White Tower down. Turok is kind of disgusted by this and informs Fane that he's going to give the horn as a gift for the Empress that he serves. But this, instead of worrying Fane or getting him upset, this actually excites Fane, who wishes to manipulate a person in high power. So he now sets his sight on the Empress instead of Turok and tries to convince Turok to take him to the Empress. And then the last chapter, 35, studying Sofu. Is it Sofu? Just I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Sofu.
It's like a real soft T, yeah.
That's Sofu. What I thought. Yeah, so the group heads to the steady where they're trying to access the Waygate to get to Toman Head. They meet more of Loyal's species, and along the way they encounter at the center of their little town within the steady, there's this giant stump of like the greatest tree in that steady, and they encounter 3 Aiel women who begin to charge at them. There's a little conflict, but before any violence ensues, one of the Ogier gets between them and stops the encounter, and they part ways. Matt and Perrin, or I think more specifically Matt, tries to convince Rand that they're after him based off of their encounter previously with an oil. Wow, I can't even.
They're looking for he who comes with the dawn.
Yeah, I forget I think that's the name.
The Karakarn.
The Karakarn, yeah. Thank you. And they're convinced it's him because they can't think of any other Aiel.
Oh, you're the one Aiel we know. Yeah.
So they make this like very loose assumption based off their little bit of knowledge they have. And that's pretty much the end of the chapter. Oh, and then we get a rather, in my opinion, cringy little bit of dialogue about the dynamics between the men and women Ogier and how they marry, and how it's not too different according to Rand from the way that humans in the land marry, which I'm sure we'll discuss more. But yeah, that's pretty much the end of that chapter. There's not really much of a cliffhanger. It kind of ends on, like, I was expecting some kind of cliffhanger, but it just kind of ends on the marriage topic and Loyal being very concerned about getting married. If he stays too long or gets if they find out too much about him, he's worried that a female Ogier will propose to him and he won't really have a choice except to accept.
I hope they I hope they represent that in the show, because I think that's like one of my favorite parts of the book is like how nervous Loyal gets about like his mother like finding out, and like the elders finding out and getting him married.
Right, yeah, the reminders that despite being like 90 years old or something, that he is still a child or at late adolescent by Ogier standards. I guess ticking time bomb wise, the big cliffhanger overall, if not for the chapter itself, is that the Horde is going to be on its way to the heart of the Shan-Chan Empire soon, right? Like that, wow. Oh, you just said it, Lord Turok is going to have it sent back to Shan-Chan, right? So they've got to get to Toman Head, where all the stuff has been happening, like away from the main characters. We've had everything happening with the Shan-Chan invasion and the White Cloaks who are nearby and on the trail of them all. So it's all coming to a head, presumably, at Toman pretty soon. The aptly named convergence point for all the separate plot threads so far. And yeah, a lot of things happening in Carrienne and involving all the Dice Daimar stuff and Lord Barthanes. Now, you might have said it, Dan, but we did get confirmed that he was a dark friend, right, in the course of these, and that's why he's going along with Thane stuff. And
they make the assumption, the party makes the assumption after Horan sniffs it out, like when they're trying to determine where Pan and Fane's located. He kind of I think he tracks them down to the mansion using his sniffing ability, and Darren kind of just assumes that he's a dark friend if they're kind of hoarding or protecting the dark friend, the other dark friend. So, and she makes a comment about how like dark friends are in higher places as well. They're not just like kind of lower lives.
And do we know, sorry, to pull back the curtain for the listeners, I think we're all going to be a little rusty on these chapters this week because due to a scheduling issue, we had to delay a week after we read for our discussion. So I'm trying to remember, did we also find out King Galdrian might be a dark friend? Or it seems that he probably had Dana murdered, and then Tom is going to go get vengeance. But do we know why at all that he did? I'm sure that was intimated or explained in that chapter, but I'm struggling to remember on air now how he got so tangled in it?
I don't think they said that Galadriel was a dark friend. I think that Tom just took, like, they implied Tom took their revenge on Galadriel for killing Dina, right? I don't think they actually.
Right.
said
It was
he a dark
related to
friend.
the Great Game, though. So he murders and has like the Partheness assassinated because he thinks Rand courting him is kind of an act of treason or kind of inciting the
Against
game.
the king.
Like against the king. So the king in retaliation, and there's word about Tom speaking with Rand, so I think that incites him, and he has him murdered or has her murdered.
Well, they're trying to kill Tom, right? Dana is not actually the target. She was kind
of a collateral, I think, in kind of a fridging moment.
Yeah, get it. The at this point between the show and the book, the two of them, the classic killing of a female partner for advancing the plot motivation of one of the male characters, which of course we talked loads about with Perrin in the show season 1, and now here we're getting where it actually happens in the books for Tom, so we don't have to. Did not wind up having to wait very long for him being motivated. Although at this point he's not really rejoining the main story yet, right? Because he's on this mission to kill King Galdry. So we don't really know how he's going to wind up tied back into the.
But I think the reader can assume that he's now getting tied back into things. It felt a little bit to me that it was like a way of... It felt a little cheap because instead of him having to make the hard decision, they just kind of murder her. So he didn't really have a choice but to kind of come back to the life he was trying to leave. So I think it would have been a much harder decision if he had to consciously make the choice versus having his life kind of turned upside down again. It seems to be the easy way out for a fantasy character.
Going through it the first time, I felt the same way. Going through it this time, I just keep thinking it's those Taverin, like, fate things going on where he had to be looped back in, so it's just the cause of, like, the pattern, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
That just being around these folks is a good way to get killed or maimed or otherwise drawn into expanding plot.
That does make that concept pretty creepy because if you're hanging around Rand, then you have no idea if somebody's going to get murdered around you or if you're going to lose something, or kind of like the sea merchant getting pulled into the whole Shan arc was kind of not his choice at all.
Should we go into I guess we could just go through whatever our highlights are along. Keeley, were there any big points you wanted to talk about throughout the chapters? Like what were the major takeaways for you, if you remember from when we were going to record this last week?
I think I was a little bit frustrated along the way with how people were acting about the Waygates, and the fact that they weren't listening to Rand when he said that like where Padden Fane was going. Like, I thought that was pretty fucking clear. Like, he's leaving this message, and the whole time they're like, oh well, if he shows up, like maybe he'll be there. Like, of course he's gonna fucking be there. Like, that was kind of annoying. The fact that they walk up to the Waygate before Ingtar or anyone shows up, and Rand just pulls the leaf thing off of it and it starts opening, so the Machin Shin comes out the first time. Like, you fucking idiot.
Really quickly.
Like, yeah, like, why would you wait for them to fucking get there? Did you learn nothing from the last time? And then the whole thing about, like, where they were talking about, oh, how serious the Waygates are, and at no point does anyone say, like, to everyone else, like, we've done this before. Like, it might be different, but we've done it before.
Well, that's what Rand keeps, like Loyal is the one being like, we shouldn't do this, right? We should wait. This is dangerous. Or is it Hurin? And then Rand keeps being like, I can do it. It's here and it's been done. It's fine. It's gonna be fine. And then opens it to immediately have Muck and Shin there.
And so a lot of the language around the Waygates was just it just didn't really fit with other things that had happened. And the only thing, I don't remember if they said this before, but they said in chapter 34, I think, that whoever blows the horn of Valyria is bound to it. And I don't really know what all that's supposed to mean, but I thought that was the first time that they really said that.
Yeah, it might be. I think the main thing we knew or learned about the horn so far was that the call will answer for anyone, like even the Dark One himself, that presumably if Balzamon blows the horn, then all the dead heroes will serve him. I don't think we knew that, about the whatever it means for the other way around, that the person who blows it will be bound to the horn.
related to Rand being able to open the Waygate, so I remember a discussion we had with the first book, and we were under the assumption that you needed to channel the one power to open it. Because I know we had that whole conversation with the show versus the book and how they're able to open it without...
You don't need the power of the book was the thing, right? That's
but they added it.
Yeah,
so they added
that
it
in the
to
show.
the show that you need the one power, so that complicates things, because then we were wondering how Pat and Fane opens it. Did they state that as a requirement? I forget what the context was of that conversation, but I remembered it when I was reading this section, because I was like, how did Rand open it without the one power?
You guys talked about it in one of the more recent ones where you were talking about the portal stones, I think, and how they you guys are surmising that they're combining the portal stones and waygates as like transportation mediums to like reduce the amount of kind of confusion that could be caused around them.
Yeah, and I guess the show never explicitly said that you need. Well, maybe it did. I don't remember if they explicitly said you needed to channel, but we see Moraine having to do it every time and to open it up with the one power. There's no leaves. There's no carving mechanism on the show version of it. It seems to work like the waystones, like you're saying, Nick. The combination thing we speculated. So maybe we'll find there's another way. Maybe Pod and Fane is going to be a channeler. Maybe one of the Darkfriends working for him as one. I guess there's a lot of ways they could explain how he's been able to all his back and which I guess with the Waygate here being inside the manor, presumably Barthen has built his manor around the Waygate on purpose, and I guess I'm curious if this is like long-term stratagem thing, like the Dark One attempting to have control for that transit, since that was such a major plot point in the first book of how the Trollocs and Shadowspawn were getting everywhere around them. So maybe he has control over a lot of the network. But now apparently something's going on with Machin Chin, which we know is not related to the Dark One and will in fact eat any of the Dark One's creatures or followers that go in. So another
it's funny, I've been playing a lot of Civilization 6 recently. It reminds me of like when you have an enemy around you and you just buy a piece of land so that they can't like travel through it. That's what it felt like Barthanes did here. He's just like, I'm gonna grab this ogre steading with this Waygate so I can bring some or push some Darkfriends in or out.
Do we know in context of the Waygate with Mashi Chin being able to come out, though, because they acted surprised he was able to come out of the Waygate. In the past, I think he had to, they said he had to stay within the Waygate or he was confined to it. Yeah. So do we have any idea how he's doing that yet, or is it still kind of left as a mystery?
Caleb, I think there's actually some lore that comes on later in one of the book series that talks about that, but I feel like it's really light. I don't know if there's an explanation yet.
I truly do not remember that at all. My impression at this point, or the first thing I assumed when reading The Great Hunt, is that it's been gorging because it's been eating so much lately and growing as a result in power. That was kind of my assumption here, that there's all these people using the ways suddenly in a way that there hasn't been in a long time, and the more people it eats, the bigger it gets, the stronger it gets. Maybe it can get out of. The show changed it so dramatically, but the book Machin Chin really, it reminds me so much of the Mashadar Mist and Shadar Logoth, and so I don't know if I'm just imputing some of the same rules or the same desires that it has to infect and consume. I guess the main difference being Machin Chin wants to eat you, and Mashadar wants to spread through the entire world and everything to draw. And now we see, Thane presumably doing the same thing that happened with Mordeth before, where he's just, like you said, Dan, just so invigorated. The moment he finds out that there's a higher political power he can attach himself to leech off and to accomplish whatever his ultimate purposes are, like in his manipulations. Yeah, he's just going to go straight for it, which feels very Shadar Logoth to me from what we learned of how that place was ultimately destroyed.
I thought that was fun with Thane, how he just was like, his whole dynamic with that conversation and getting excited about learning about the Empress and all that was, it just was like a fun character moment. Good interaction between him and, why am I spacing on his name right now? But
Lord Turok.
Turok, yeah.
And I like the little beat there. I don't have the line in front of me, but it's something like Thane says something he's not supposed to, which is easy in the Shan courts, and gets like smacked across the head onto the ground by Turok's second in command, and the next line is something like, "Fate decided in that moment exactly how the man would die," or something
like death or
planning his method there. Yeah, just the way he interacts with the world. It's I continue to also really enjoy his extreme cartoon villainy. It's just very fun. His private sniggering and laughing and maniacal plotting and hatred of everyone that abuses him, Gollum style.
It kind of reminds me of like the Redwall villains, like the rats in there. They're just like as maniacal as you can get, and everything is just like seething with like villainy and just like we'll murder you and cut your throats, and it's really over the top. But it can be fun though, and it adds a lot of color, but it does come off very satirical at sometimes.
And speaking of obligatory Lord of the Rings connections, did anyone get the sense in Chapter 31 onward that Ingtar is sporting some real Boromir vibes here about when he's not wanting to slow down and do the Carrion investigation and go to Barthanes? He's like, "I just do not like to wait. The horde is almost in my hands. I will have it. I must. And really seems like even though he hasn't even touched the horn, like it's doing its power possessive thing on him, that corruptive item of power in a very Boromir-esque way.
Yeah, got those vibes.
Is that what's drawing him? I was trying to figure it out because that did stand out to me. He's getting so obsessive and intense, and we don't really have much more of his personality aside from this really, really intense desire to find the horn.
Well, he started out being very noble, right?
And he
very
does
principled.
He does seem to be degrading a little bit in quality, but it just like this desperation to find the horn is consuming him. I feel like he has this inferiority complex too because he hasn't even been able to get close to it yet. He keeps being one step ahead of him
and teleporting around the world.
But I didn't know that makes sense. I didn't think about it that way. I was trying to figure out back home like what his objectives were, like if his honor or his place in his rank and everything is tied to finding the horn, or if there was like internal objectives he had with getting the horn. I was trying to recall if there was something in the beginning about that and why he was specifically sent to go collect the horn, and if that kind of tied into his rationale and why he's being so motivated or intense about his search. But I couldn't remember anything there. That's like, that makes more sense. So if you're comparing it to kind of Boromir's response to the ring and kind of getting the corruption there, or the desire to be able to use it and return it.
Which is interesting to have that and Matt exhibiting basically the same symptoms with regard to the dagger withdrawal at this point, that we have these two objects of power, one of which is supposed to be innately evil and corrupting, and the other of which is meant to serve a good purpose, even though it can serve an evil one. And both of them are having that same corruptive magnetic effect of the need to get there, although it's more like withdrawal in Matt's case throughout these, as he gets paler and paler and gaunter, and Varen's healings do less and less. So I don't know if there's anything to draw from that other than it's like this is it seems to be a really popular concept in high fantasy, especially since Lord of the Rings, and Jordan is clearly a big fan. So corrupting source power, whether or not.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
With how corrupted he's looking and withered, and everyone feeling pity for him, I wonder if they're going to use that as a transitionary state for the actors playing Matt.
Yeah.
With the second scene, or with the second season, they can really go heavy on the makeup and kind of like the possession looking, like the Omen or something, or I don't know, just like kind of have the makeup be pretty intense, so that way you can kind of spend that for half a season, and then finally when the actor is revealed or they kind of go back to like normal look, it won't be as shocking when it's a different actor.
Right.
That's a good point.
Into it a little bit.
That's a good point. That'd be pretty funny. Pretty cool. Like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Yeah, like a reveal. I thought there were a couple of things going on here in these chapters that allude to later. So first, and this, I remember when we were talking about the TV show, I originally thought the mining scene there was like the same as what happened here in chapter 31, where they kind of come across the excavation happening with these giant artifacts from the Age of Legends. So that was like a fun thing to revisit for me, because obviously they're hinting at those foreshadowing of some sort of like monster things from the Age of Legends that are being dug out of the ground. And then other things I thought were one thing I have in my notes was Varen here states like she was talking about kind of the strongest women who might be able to, I forget if it was like, might be able to use one of these tools or something, and she was like being the Amaryllis, Saswan, Sanche, and then Moraine, Elida being the Aes Sedai who's at the court in what's it called?
In Camelin.
Camelin. And then the 3 in training, she says, right? So
and perhaps 1 or 2 others along with training.
Yeah. So I thought that was cool because you start to learn here like the hierarchy of the Aes Sedai and who's like the strongest versus not. I thought that was kind of interesting.
I thought she was like really strangely blasé about the possibility of this. She's like, oh, no big deal that these incredibly powerful artifacts from the Age of Legends are being exposed. Even though she also thinks that she has said before, the king shouldn't be messing with this. But she's also like, oh, it's not going to come to any harm. What Aes Sedai today would aid a man in channeling? And then she brings up hardly anybody could survive it. But who would do it anyway? And Logain would not be remotely powerful enough. He'd be burned to cinders by trying. And I'm just thinking, Varen, they're a Black Aja. Like this is a confirmed fact now. And there's plenty of reason. That there are just wilders running around. Anybody who could try to fuck with this thing and maybe they're not going to destroy the world, but at least themselves and whoever's around them burned to pieces. But she seems
But even on top of that, literally she listed Egwene, who's romantically interested and close to Rand. So she's like, she goes through that kind of like roster of people that are able to do it. Which I thought was funny because it's like, instead of just being like, there's a couple powerful women, but not very many. She's like literally listing every single like woman that could be able to do it. And Rand's like right there. It's just like, these 2 powerful, like, no big deal. They're never going to be joined together. It's like the most obvious foreshadowing for like a final book showdown of like, you're going to need like Egwene over here and Rand's going to be over here. And like, it's kind of fun now piecing it together because she did give you the roster of who it could be. But now that she mentioned it, I don't know if she intentionally knew she's foreshadowing. And if she
has to be being tongue in cheek, right?
No. I feel like it's
so
cognitive
obvious.
dissonance. She's like totally, the Aes Sedai are just way like they're in a place now where they have just been deteriorating for centuries and think that what they know is what's fact. And I feel like she's not being tongue in cheek. I feel like she like legit is just like totally cognitive dissonance. Like doesn't see it as a potential option.
She does say at the very end, I sort of skimmed over, don't worry, Ingtar. You don't need to worry, at least not until the true Dragon Reborn declares himself, and then we will all have enough to worry about as it is. So no need to get up about this. So, and she does phrase most of that as a question. I think it's worth pointing out, like what Aes Sedai today would aid a man in channeling. Would I perhaps? Would I, who am currently aiding the person that I think might be the Dragon Reborn along this path?
I think it also kind of shows like, I mean, I know this is just kind of how like human brain works, but it's also how many times does something crazy have to happen before they all just start accepting that shit's changing? Mm-hmm. Because like anytime that someone's like, oh no, that can't happen, that's never happened before. Okay, well every fucking person you meet, you say is the most powerful in 400 or 4,000 years. Shit can happen. Like open your brain a little bit to the possibilities of everything fucking changing.
Like this empire we didn't know existed of the long lost descendants of Arthur Hawkwing gone for 800 years. They don't think that, this whole continent we didn't know about. Clearly, there are more things under heaven and earth than are imagined in your philosophy, Varen.
The Seanchan are confusing me, though, because why are the White Cloaks seemingly the only ones we're getting a perspective about knowing they're invading? Like, where's the kings and queens and, like, kind of the ruling bodies? Mm-hmm. Like, even the city they're in, nobody's really talking about this invasion. I don't know if they're that far removed geographically, but it seems odd that nobody within the main cast is aware of this or has any side characters talking about it.
I feel like it is the geography. Sorry, I was jumping, Caleb. If you look at the map, there's like where Tolman Head and Falm are, where all the Seanchan are, is like on the westernmost portion of the land, and then the Ar Doman, where the White Cloaks are, is like immediately outside of that. So it's like the White Cloaks are sort of encircled this area that the Seanchan have taken ownership of. So I don't think it's gotten to the rest of the kings yet, besides just kind of...
It's like an isolated peninsula. And we also learned from the White Cloaks' perspective, from what's his name, who escapes me at the moment, that Toman Head and Falm generally are like largely depopulated in large reasons, because like this is like a decaying kingdom where these holdings have been shrinking. There are all these areas that are claimed by a bunch of different political figures, but they don't have any troops there, and there's just like scattered villages, and they basically, like, war after war after war has left this area in an increasingly like wilderland front kind of state.
Like, I think it's like if Falm would be in like Portugal, and like Tomon Head and all that area was like Spain, and then everything and like Spain was and is owned by the White Cloaks and whatnot, and so everything to the east of that is sort of all where everyone else is.
Which now now that you say that, Nick, I'm looking at this map and be like, oh yeah, there's another analog for this invasion here, which is the like the Moors coming up from across the sea to the south into the Iberian Peninsula, right, and establishing like a stronghold there, and gradually taking over like this huge portion of Europe in this area. This, you know, sort of like, oh, we totally discounted this huge empire that was across the sea for a long time. Like, you know, they're suddenly coming from nowhere and just sweeping across the...
Random aside, based off this was like offline in our group chat, but where is North Arbor? Is that like north, or like on the map, or is that not
Remind
really?
me what North Arbor is?
North Arbor? Yeah, what's North Arbor?
It is the one that looks like a vagina.
Oh,
like,
no,
oh,
that's Tar-Valon. That's Tar-Valon.
Yeah.
Oh, did they just
I think
label
North
it wrong
Arbor.
in the meme?
Yeah, the label on that picture looks like it's saying North Arbor is the place that the whole map is looking at, but it's actually Tar-Valon, and North Arbor is like a part of it.
Like literally the North Harbor of Tar-Valon, the island, right?
So that would be too small and specific for like kind of the map the book has.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like you can't even
only
see
in
the
that.
river there.
Yeah, it's only in that like that blow up where it's Tar-Valon.
Yeah, okay.
Which I think my ebook edition does not have that other map for some reason. I remember that map distinctly in the physical.
Is that an older edition, like the smaller specific one of like Tar-Valon? Because I don't think the new editions have. We only have like the big colored map of the whole continent.
Oh, I have all Kindle like editions and Kobo Clara editions, and it's like super hard to see anything on them.
Yeah, this one's been super helpful for kind of like going through.
Oh, that's a good map.
Like, yeah, like full color, like everything labeled. It was good for the first book when they're traveling so much and trying to track it, like all the routes they're taking and following along the river. But I haven't been using it as much for this second book since they've been teleporting all over, so it's been really hard to kind of follow.
Leaping across the world. Yeah, that does make it, I find, like in any fantasy, much harder to have a firm sense of the geography the moment characters start flying everywhere or teleporting all over, because it changes your sense of scale dramatically once the Great Eagle come in.
I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I don't like it a lot when quick travel becomes the more common way of traveling for a bunch of characters. Like Game of Thrones started doing that later in the show, and it kind of just cheapened a lot of the distance that they had. Like your dragon could just get you across from, like, before they made it sound like traveling north to south in Game of Thrones could take like a whole season, and then all of a sudden within an episode, like Daenerys is like flying from like the uppermost wall down south in the span of like an episode or two. So like it makes your world feel very tiny when your characters can like teleport across it very quickly. Like I feel like
that's when the show started going downhill, though, is when they first like flew the dragons up north, and then the one like died in the ice. That was when, to me, I was like, okay, this is no longer any sort of like remotely believable.
Yeah, but that gets me worried about like Wheel of Time too. I know it's a different kind of fantasy and it's like a higher fantasy with more magic involved, but like I get worried when your characters can fast travel so conveniently and so easily that it's
maybe that's
there's no
why
consequence for it.
But we're still getting those consequences put in here, right? Because they tried to do the fast travel gate in these chapters, and then Machin Chin is like so much more dangerous than it was last time. Now you can't even get into the ways without Machin Chin like being there waiting.
But they're still
ready
gonna
to come
try
out.
fast traveling though. Like they're still going to the steady.
Yeah.
To fast travel, they just have to go a little bit further.
Right. Well, that's been this whole, like, most of this book, right, has been traveling a good ways on foot and then getting transported to another world and then traveling a good ways there and then coming back and travel. So it's still got that kind of heavy travelogue feeling. And we also have all these armies moving around. We got the Shan very slowly. Well, you know, slowly by character scale, but very quick by army scale, coming into the West Coast and all that. So it feels like this is, I don't know, this story is still, for me, like, has a sense of place and time and narrative thrust taking us between those. I don't know how long it'll maintain that, but I do, like I said, I'm kind of attracted to the way in which, maybe it's too convenient, but the way in which we're all being drawn to Toman Head, which has been foreshadowed since the very beginning of the book as being this place where things are gonna go down, and the show has taken that to the next level by.
I don't remember that. What? Refresh me. What happened in the beginning of the book that led to kind of the foreshadowing?
Well, we learned at the very, very beginning of this book that something is going down in Toman Head, and that there's crazy things going on in the world. The Aes Sedai are talking about sending delegations there. That's part of Swan Sanche's catch up with Moraine and the others, and they're trying to figure out where to split their forces.
But why? What's their rationale though? What news do they know about the Shanshan, or what's their explanation for why the Aes Sedai are getting involved?
Well, at that point, I think that they had just heard that there's an invasive force and that there was channeling going on, and war, and that's something involving the White Cloaks. But then we very quickly started getting more and more hints of what was happening there. We started getting the Baal Doman chapters, and then he gets sucked into all of it, and then he's in to see exactly what's going on with the Shanshan and with the fact that, speaking of things Varen hasn't anticipated in terms of what channelers might do, we have the chain enslaved channelers that.
It's a lot of different factions to be introducing for this book, because you have the Aiel now coming down from the desert, and you have the Shanshan from the seas. So they're really expanding. I'm not against it, but it's just interesting that he's expanding the world so much with a bunch of different factions, and the world building is so much more intense in this book than it was in the first one. And it seems to be doing that in a fraction of the time it took the first book to actually lay anything out. So Jordan really got his act together between books, and I don't know. I guess the first one gave him enough time to actually figure out what he wanted the world to look like and where he wanted the narrative to go. But
yeah,
it's very surprising how different this book is from the first one.
Didn't they? So I had that same reaction too during my first read through, and I feel like I remember reading that, I don't know if you guys talked about this already, that the first book was really his attempt at trying to get something published in this, but it wasn't intended to have a series afterwards. It was only later on that he then just made that decision. Does that ring a bell?
Before the end of the first book, as far as I know, he
I
knew
think
that
the first book.
Going to, yeah.
Oh, really?
As far as I know, from what we read about when Tom Doherty first approached him about it, or whichever way around it was, that the original plan was a trilogy, and then that Doherty knew that Jordan would not be able to restrict himself to that, and that, or right, that the original plan was a novel. Then Jordan started writing the novel, and it became clear it was not going to be one novel. And then before he finished Eye of the World, knew it was going to be a trilogy. And then Tom Doherty was convinced and had the foresight to sign on for, I think, at least 7 books contract at that. But I am a little hazy on the details of it, because I know Harriet was sort of the one who made it happen in the first place as his agent, and she was already working at Tor, I believe, which was Jordan's imprint for the rest of his life after getting Eye of the World published, and that was Harriet was editor. Was she also an agent? See, I'm too fuzzy on the details.
Yeah, it just felt like the first book really felt like a pilot TV episode where you're like, okay, this could go in 100 different directions, and it could stand out on its own as well, and then everything after that, I remember I got really sucked in by this book, and reading it again, I could remember why I was getting more sucked in by this book than the first one.
Yeah, and did we discuss, was it the publisher who made the decision to have it be so similar to Lord of the Rings, or was that just, I think we had talked about a lot of fantasy series had to kick off in a very similar style, because that was what the consumers wanted, and then he could turn it into his own thing once he actually got some readers on board with the first book. But that wasn't Jordan's idea to have it be so similar?
I believe Tom Doherty said in an interview, and I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure he said in that interview that I was talking about that he proposed to Jordan about writing a Lord of the Rings style novel. But that's also just one person involved saying that well over a decade after the series had been underway. So I'm not sure how much of that is true, because Jordan had not written many. I don't know if he'd written any published novels under his own world at that point, because he was predominantly doing the Conan novels, which we talked about for a while. That was before that he was writing a lot of novellas and short stories. But yeah, I think that was this. We can listeners, if you want to know with a little more certainty, go back and check out our first season there on some of those episodes where we actually delve into those interviews, and hopefully at some point we'll go back to production history. Any other big points people wanted to get to about these chapters and what happens in them before we wrap up for this episode?
So the only note I have my book notes in front of me. The only note I have for chapter 32 is I love how all the women are flirting with Rand. He has no idea. It's just like that scene where he's in like the ball and he's like being trapped by those three wives, and they're like, my husbands are away, and he's like Pikachu face meme, like, oh my god, like you should really be careful
So
when your husbands are away.
Yeah.
Just like. So that was the only other thing that I wrote down in my notes that I thought was really funny.
It really does. It almost feels like self-parody at the point of this ball, but it is kind of like comedy, like more comedy lampooning of the great games. How it feels like to me still than taking it particularly serious, except until dying. But yeah, I don't know. I think I was primed not to enjoy that as the Rand stuff as much as I would have if we hadn't just had all the Celine chapters on her. But it is much funnier. I thought like that was a more entertaining way of playing with that dynamic.
I feel like this, because I enjoyed some of the ballroom sequence, like at the mansion. I think it could be really fun in a visual narrative if the show went in a very old Tim Burton direction with how he handled like crazy stereotypical characters, and just had like everything be very extreme. So like really cool visuals, like over the top for everything. Had these very like pish posh like characters
The
at
giant
the ball.
wigs and all that.
Yeah, like very stylized for everything, and just had the extremes could make it a very fun sequence. Because if you played it up and you have that self-awareness, I think it can be really fun. If the show takes this too seriously but keeps a lot of this dialogue, it's a little concerning. So hopefully they don't take it the more serious route, and they can be a little more self-aware when it comes to a lot of the dialogue here, or if they could just rewrite it to not be so on the nose all the time.
I think like if this scene played out in the show, I feel like Rand would jump in the closet with three women. It's like I feel like it's like the show is like so much more explicit about sexuality than the books are.
Yeah. And they don't seem as shy about it.
That's true, and the characters have actually heard of sex before at the start of the book, which I don't think is true for any of the mains at the beginning of Ivan.
They are really immature in the book compared to the show. That is one strong benefit of the aging them up a little bit and having the cast be slightly more aware.
I agree, though. I know we talked about it before, but leaning into like the kind of silly archetypes that you see here would be a really nice way to reconcile like some of the dialogue here on the show. And I think they did it. I wish they would do it a little bit more on the show.
Yeah, and maybe they'll have more room for levity with the story. Even though this is like the darker things happening in a lot of places in The Great Hunt, I still feel like it finds more room for the levity amidst that, and some of the comics go a little better. Mixed feelings on the setting stuff. I do like what you mentioned, Nick, the loyal being in trouble with his mom dynamic thing, but not so fond of what you mentioned, Dan. They just like always we have to go into these gender essential discussions going off about like the ways in which women control men and really control the world.
Yeah, it's so binary all the damn time. Like the loyal mom thing is fun because he's like she's gonna try to marry me off right away. Like it gives him this cute like a little kid vibe to him, and it's kind of fun. But the binary is all the time. It's just so strong and so in your face. And I don't know if I would have noticed it as a kid, but just now it's just like he really breaks the genders apart and is so adamant about it, with every like reminding you about that every moment he gets.
Yeah, and including with Matt at this point. 2 books into this, still being like, are you too crazy when they point their weapons at the IEO? Like, I don't care if they are IEO, they're still women. Like, and it's just like the most. It's and you know they besides the fact that they are armed with spears, and he already knows that the reputation that the spear maidens have to begin with. We're already 2 books into the story about like he's met Aes Sedai, he's met women who can call down lightning, and just this whole still clinging to the notions of those encoded roles, physical and whatever code he has going on.
I think when I first started experiencing that too, I remember looking at the copy. I looked at the copyright date of the book, and I was like, "Oh, 90s. Yep, Okay, yep, that sounds about right.
Yeah, just you forget about it when you're not reading, because I don't know, I feel like I'm consuming so much modern media, I sometimes forget the way these were written, and it might reflect the culture of the time, I guess, if he wants to build a fantasy that kind of reflects some of that, but there is a disparity there versus like watching a modern fantasy and them like the show's been removing all of that, so I doubt like a sequence like this would ever play out in the show, fortunately, but it's definitely a reminder of the time period this was written and kind of the cultural mindset of that a lot of people held to.
We probably still would get part, which we didn't note about. They, the three Aiel women have like real horror and contempt when they see Rand having a heron-marked blade. The first negative reaction he's gotten to having a heron-marked sword so far, and they whisper about he's wearing a sword thing, which we've gotten the indication before that somebody has mentioned in passing that the Aiel refuse to touch swords and that they're all about their spears, but that is not. I think that's been explained.
Oh, I forgot about that. Is there a rationale? I know the shows had her using all sorts of weapons in that final. So they had the Aiel in one episode, Rand's mom fighting them off in that cool beginning snow sequence on Dragonmount. She was using like knives and other weapons aside from a spear in that scene though, because in desperation she's like pulling them out of the guards and then like stabbing them with their own weapons.
Yeah.
Did she use a sword in that? I thought she did though. So I wonder if they. Oh, she didn't.
No, just the knives. Yeah.
Does a knife not count because it's a smaller blade? Like, what's the criteria for this contempt?
I guess that's exactly it. Yeah, it's just the at what point does the knife become maybe they'd be a little
like a certain like
yeah
height that you have to reach before it's a problem.
Exactly.
Do we get an explanation for that, or is it just like a cultural thing with the Aiel?
No, there's eventually an explanation for it, but I don't think there's one right now.
Nope. What about Dan, Keeley? Either of you have any final thoughts on these?
Still the steading chapter seemed a little slow. It's interesting learning more about the like Loyal's kind, like the other Ogiers. I did like the mansion, some of the stuff there, and there always felt to be enough tension racked up, even with the silly Rand stuff and women. I liked some of the over-the-top politics and the game being played. I thought Tom was a badass. I really liked that they hint at him being a little crazy now that he loses Dina. Like, he smiles at the end of the chapter. That leads him to be more fun than the show version at the moment. I hope they kind of expand upon him, because he only got like 2 episodes or something, like 3 episodes in the show. They really underplayed his character, and I really liked Tom in the first book. So
which proportionally means Dana will then get about, the 12 seconds before they
12 seconds before they kill her, yeah. I was thinking about that. She's going to have so little screen time, if they even bother including her, which they might not. They might actually just skip that because of how little it is in the chapter. I feel like you have to reduce everything in the book down by like a third of what the content is, so she probably will just be cut completely. But I do like that.
Or the opposite if she gets the Stefan.
Oh, yeah. But it's fun, though, yeah. I liked his character a lot. I think that was one of the highlights. I do wish he had more of a choice with coming back in. I feel like, but at the same time, the Tavarin thing that you mentioned, Nick, is fascinating, because then it's kind of like a curse that everyone gets touched by. So that makes it a little more interesting. But it's still a little bit like I wish Tom had to have made that choice himself instead of having an assassination pull him back in without him really having much of a say. Because at this point, he has no, like, all the stakes and stuff that were drawing him to that life were just removed without him really having a say in it.
I think I kind of agree with what everyone's been saying. Like, I'm still, if Matt died, I wouldn't care. Like, I'm just kind of, I'm still tired of his character. And like, when Loyal at one point, Matt says something like, oh, well, you can stay and get married now. It's like, are you not fucking listening? Because he just said 1,000 times he doesn't want to get, like, just stop being an asshole. But I did really like, I wrote down, I don't know how to say her name, but is it like Alar or Alar? I wrote down she's the elderliest Ogier. And how they brought out Trial, who they said was the last Ogier to go through a Waygate, and then came out and he's like dead inside. Like, that was kind of that was really fucked up. Oh, am I going into a next chapter?
Oh, you might be. I unless I missed that passage. Yeah, I think that.
Okay, I might be in the next chapter then. I started reading ahead and then was like, wait, what chapters are we doing for this week?
It was confusing.
Then yeah, I'm fine with what everyone else said, that like Matt can die and.
Then we will get in 36 to 40 next time, if you're reading along, folks, and decide to log me out right in the middle, being about to do my end spiel. So I'll see if I can get it off the top of my head. Like I said, next time we'll be reading chapters 36 to 40 of The Great Hunt. This episode of Whatcast was produced by yours truly. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Caleb Wimble. Keeley, where can people find you on the internet?
On Twitter and Instagram at Keeley_reads.
Dan, where can people find you?
on Instagram and Twitter under the handle PansyDan.
And Nick, in which lane of the Dota 2 map can people most typically find you?
They can't anymore. I had to give it up after I had a baby. They could find me in the True Earth scenarios on 6-6.
Nice. And I'll be most likely, if you don't find me editing the show, in the lands betwixt of Elden Ring.
Yeah.
The first video game that consumed my life in a good while. But you can find us all at wattcast.net. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Wattcast Podcast. Support the show at patreon.com/Wattcast. You can also support us in a big way by leaving Wattcast a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Especially if you lead some words with the review, it makes a huge difference in people finding it when they're going, clicking through on the old podcast networks there, looking for something to listen to. And the number one way we get new listeners, of course, is if you tell a friend about the show. That's all for today. Thanks so much for listening, folks. And remember, this is neither the beginning nor the ending of the turning of the wheel of time, but it is an ending. Farewell.
So they don't let you give reviews on Google Podcasts, which is like what the platform I use for podcasts.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like no reviews, no stars, nothing. And I was like searching around. I searched desktop and mobile in there.
Yeah, I've never used Google personally, other than submitting the podcast to it. So I had no idea what the functionality is there.
Well, you have some Google listeners, Caleb.
Extremely. You might have been one of the two the first season. It was like 400 Apple iTunes, like 200 Spotify, and then like going all down the list. And like Google was like extremely low, even among Android. Apparently, I don't know what.
Probably my mobile and my desktop.
Yeah.
Those are probably the two.